The past decade and a half has seen a massive cultural shift, in large part to the rise of social media and the near ubiquity of devices such as smartphones, which have granted more and more people easy access to the internet. According to the Pew Research Center in 2021, social media platforms are used by a majority of American adults, with Facebook and YouTube dominating at 81% and 69% nice? Question mark of respondents respectively. Our world is more connected now than in any previous era of history, social media having made political activism, education on niche topics, and forming communities based on shared interests easier than ever. And with near infinite information at the fingertips of most people, the knowledge gap between those of higher and lower socioeconomic status grows narrower each year. However, for all the information available online, there is just as much misinformation, and distinguishing between facts and lies can be tricky. Despite social media having become part of everyday life for most Americans, 64% also believe the effects of that these sites have on society are largely negative, with 28% citing rampant misinformation as the most significant reason. Recent years have seen increasingly hostile and politically charged discourse over fake news and various conspiracy beliefs, underpinned by the idea that facts are now apparently up for debate. This trend has been especially alarming in regards to public health and environmental concerns. An April 2022 study found evidence to suggest a positive correlation between COVID vaccine hesitancy and an increase in the amount of misinformation online. Surveys of American adults conducted in early 2021 found that between 40 and 47% were hesitant to get the vaccine, and as of January of 2022, only 60% were fully vaccinated. Yikes. At the same time, climate change has continued to be a hotly debated subject despite increasing calls to action by scientists, with somewhere between 32 and 52% of Americans believing that climate change is either fake or has no human causes, though many deniers insist that they are pro science and are aware of the general scientific consensus on the reality of climate change. This raises the question, is the increasingly pervasive influence of social media eroding people's trust in reputable science? And so that's what I'm here to talk about today. They say do your own research, and well, guess what? I did my own research. So much research. Um, I did all this research, most of it anyways, about a year and a half ago for a paper for a graduate class. And boy, oh boy, I really don't want all that work towards the master's degree in communication to go to waste. And just had this essay on my mind for reasons lately. And I just need to get it off my chest. So don't worry, my 18 subscribers or whatever. I promise you that my next video will be part two of my Ultimate Dracula tier list. But for now, listen up here, sheeple. You are going to sit here and watch me tell you all about how all of us are being had. Part 1: Agenda Setting and the Algorithm. Misinformation, just like all information, requires visibility in order to spread far and wide on social media. The majority of major social media sites, such as Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, have a proprietary algorithm which promotes certain content and buries other content based on personal data collected from the site's users. At the individual level, an algorithm factors in a person's interests, activity across the platform, and other personal info to predict what content is the most relevant to them and to determine in which order certain content should be displayed on their feed or homepage. In aggregate, this gives social networks a tremendous amount of control over how many users and which demographics are exposed to specific news articles, posts, or videos, and the frequency with which people are exposed to certain types of content. As tools for curating the social media experience, algorithms serve the helpful function of filtering out what users may or may not wish to see while making content that is more likely to be relevant to their interests readily available. Social media companies are businesses after all, and it's in their best interest to implement automated programs to sort through the nonstop information stream passing through their servers and to disseminate that information in a manner in which promotes the most user engagement possible. However, as noted by some researchers, algorithms are fundamentally agenda setting machines, telling people which topics and trends to think about by selecting which content to display and what context to display it in. Others, however, have proposed a counterpoint to this observation. To a significant extent, new digital media have taken the authority of agenda setting out of the hands of, quote, the gatekeepers of old and granted consumers the ability to set their own agendas. These two viewpoints are complementary, I would argue. Social media users are both active audience members and also creators, contributing their own content to the algorithm and tailoring their own experiences in tandem with the algorithm. Social media algorithms are complex automated systems, but they are still designed by human programmers and require user input. Human biases are therefore baked into their functionality. This assertion that the voices of older forms of media have been displaced is corroborated by Russell Muirhead and Nancy Rosenblum's book, A Lot of People Are Saying, published in 2019, in which they describe, quote, the revolution in broadcast technology that allows anyone to disseminate what he or she writes or says without any intermediary and at no cost, as a contributing factor to the prevalence of conspiracy beliefs and disinformation online. The lack of editorial oversight on social media may invite free expression, but when paired with the power of the algorithm to manipulate which facts and opinions people are exposed to, it becomes clear that platforms have a financial incentive to look the other way when it comes to misinformation. Any content moderation that does occur is done with this in mind. Ultimately, the purpose of curating content for maximum engagement is to maximize advertising revenue. And to that end, factually inaccurate or even harmful content is not considered detrimental to the social media company's bottom line. In fact, the opposite is often true. But how is misinformation able to draw in so many clicks? There are several factors which draw people to misleading or misinformative content on social media, but perhaps the most significant one to consider is the functional displacement of traditional media. As of 2022, most American adults said that they got their news from social media at least some of the time. However, while some argue that social media platforms do perform the role of news publishers, that news content still comes from other sources. Mainstream media are both in competition with and also dependent on social media to reach audiences these days. And as people spend more time online and are less inclined to regularly get their news from print newspapers or television, news outlets have adopted the strategies of social media. Digitally native news outlets and traditional ones that have online counterparts are increasingly dependent on algorithms of their own to predict which articles are likely to get the most engagement. This suggests that there's an element of second order agenda setting at play in the relationship between news media and social media. That other forms of media follow social media's lead, producing articles based on the latest trending topics or that are otherwise crafted with virality as the goal. At the same time, both first and second order agenda setting occurs in reverse. News media communicates the importance of an issue by way of the volume of coverage dedicated to it. The more mainstream coverage it gets, the more attention it's given on social media, and in turn, an individual's perception of that issue is informed by the reactions to the news coverage by the prominent voices within their curated social network filter bubble. It is at this intersection of social media and digital news that the prominence of fake news and clickbait in promoting conspiracy beliefs and misinformation becomes evident. Because algorithms favor attention grabbing content, news sources of varying legitimacy compete for clicks and shares on social media. The result of this competition is a flood of clickbait headlines. Clickbait is a loosely defined term. Most of us like to say that we know it when we see it. It may be visual, such as an eye catching YouTube thumbnail, but usually refers to headlines crafted to provoke curiosity or a strong emotional response, baiting the viewer to click the link to find out more. In 2021, a study conducted by Pegnate et al. Likened clickbait to tabloid headlines more so than those of traditional news. Indeed, what is now called fake news is much older than social media, and many of the negative perceptions of tabloid journalism, that the title or content is misleading, that the stories are fabricated or sensationalized to sell more copies and get people talking, has carried over into the discourse around clickbait and fake news online. Unlike print tabloids, however, the use of clickbait has become not only ubiquitous, but practically a necessity on social media. You can consider likely the thumbnail that I end up choosing to use for this video as a form of mild clickbait because I wanted you to click on the video to watch it. Research into how people evaluate the veracity of headlines and information sources online and how this evaluation translates into engagement has turned up mixed results. On the one hand, most people have negative views regarding the amount of clickbait and misleading articles they see on social media and believe fake news to be a serious problem. The perceived reliability and quality of a source is a highly important factor for most people when it comes to their belief in an article from that source, as well as their decision to share that article on social media. On the other hand, even when people can easily recognize clickbait as such, it still frequently succeeds in getting people to click. This is particularly alarming when it comes to the spread of conspiracy theories online and a growing lack of trust in mainstream news sources. A recent study conducted by Baina et al. In 2023 found support for prior research demonstrating a positive correlation between repetition of misleading or false information and increased belief in its trustworthiness. Due to the combined effects of clickbait, the tendency for related content on a topic to be circulated within filter bubbles, and the nature of algorithms to promote content based on the net volume of engagement, whether positive or negative, repeated exposure to fake news and conspiracism is practically unavoidable on any corner of the internet. This factors into the concept of the new conspiracism developed by Muirhead and Rosenblum in their book. The widespread use of social media has led to the rise of a new pernicious form of conspiratorial belief that, unlike with traditional conspiracy theories, does not fulfill the function of offering explanations based in motivated reasoning, but instead only offers, quote, bare assertions. While most people recognize that conspiracy beliefs are illogical, the appeal of classic conspiracies for many is that they offer seemingly rational answers based on evidence, however erroneous, and the internal logic of believers' worldview. In the social media age, however, the ability of attention grabbing fake news to gain traction and be shared and commented on over and over imitates traditional conspiracy theories without any of the internalized rationality that makes them seem plausible. If enough people are saying the same thing, then inevitably there will be those who believe that it must contain just the tiniest grain of truth, right? However, this must be acknowledged with the caveat that many researchers are dubious about social media's inherent power to increase belief in conspiracy theories among the general population. Most people use social media after all. You're watching this video on a popular social online platform at this very moment. Being repeatedly exposed to the same piece of questionable information does not necessarily mean that an individual will be inevitably persuaded by it. While research has demonstrated a general positive correlation between social media use and conspiracy beliefs, the effects of exposure to misinformation on social networks are mediated by an individual's existing opinions and biases. According to a study by Kim et al. In 2019, the perceived reliability of an information source and the decision to share a news article from that source are heavily affected by confirmation bias. People who are already predisposed to conspiratorial thinking are more likely to believe and share misinformation online, with studies finding that the user base of conspiracy communities on social media platforms frequently promote unverified information, regardless of how plausible it is, without critically examining it first. The COVID pandemic and the rise of QAnon are both excellent case studies in the agenda setting function of social media. A study by Romer and Jameson demonstrated a positive correlation between social media use, as well as engagement with conservative media and pandemic conspiracy beliefs, while mainstream television news consumption had a negative correlation with conspiracy beliefs. This trend could in part be caused by the filter bubble effect mentioned before. Someone who is more inclined to engage with social media rather than mainstream news sources is likely to be surrounded by others who reflect and reinforce their views and possibly become more hostile toward opposing narratives. Likewise, a survey conducted by the Public Religion Research Institute, or PRRI, found that significantly more Republicans than Democrats or independents were believers in QAnon, and the most trusted new television news sources by those believers were either one, far right sources, two, conservative sources, or three, no television news sources at all. As recent research trends indicate, agenda setting in the social media sphere is complex and highly dependent on the pre existing behavioral patterns and worldviews of the platform's users. Primary concern for many researchers, therefore, as it pertains to conspiracy theories, is not so much the mere prevalence of these conspiracy theories on social media as is the ease with which conspiracists can build communities on these platforms, polarizing online spaces in ways that engender paranoia and mistrust and encourage radicalization. Even in highly disorganized spaces such as 4chan's poll message board, slash poll, slash political? I don't know. I'm not 4chaner, okay? Agenda setting is still evident there. The absolute anonymity of 4chan fosters a subculture that encourages users to be as offensive and politically incorrect as possible, and poll contributors in particular are infamous for using memes and dog whistle terms as in group code to share hate rhetoric and conspiracy beliefs rooted in white supremacy. Working together with traditional media, social media platforms engage in a process of agenda building that has serious real world implications. The spread of misinformation and a growing atmosphere of mistrust have had a direct and continuing impact on LGBTQ legislation and prejudice, protests against COVID restrictions, and the rise of the Big Ten conspiracy theory of QAnon, and a growing anti vax movement. But whose agendas are social media platforms, platforming? To further understand the role social media plays in spreading conspiracism, let's consider where misinformation and disinformation comes from in terms of propaganda theory. Part 2: Propaganda in the Social Media Sphere. Research conducted by Data and Society, the Stanford Institute Observatory Cyber Policy Center, wow, what a name, and the Center for Countering Digital Hate, or CCDH, suggests that much of the misinformation widely circulated online on issues such as vaccines, COVID, and election fraud during the 2016 and 2020 presidential elections originates as deliberate disinformation propagated by a surprisingly small number of groups and individuals. These disseminators may be trolls looking to incite inflammatory discourse, conspiracy theorists, hate groups, or well funded organizations, but all of them are skilled at media manipulation and engage in common tactics to spread their influence across social media. So let's discuss. As mentioned previously, algorithms and user activity form a feedback loop. The less that someone seeks out and engages with certain content, the more they teach a platform's algorithm not to show them that type of content. And the less they see of it, the less likely they are to critically engage with it. These filter bubbles may turn into a more extreme version, communities based around shared beliefs, which are reinforced due to a lack of exposure to alternative views and due to members' biases being reflected in each other. Term echo chamber is also frequently used to describe this phenomenon, although echo chamber also more specifically refers to self selecting communities such as Facebook groups or discussion forums on Reddit and 4chan. It is within these communities that disinformation tends to first take hold before filtering out into the wider social media sphere. And echo chambers frequently form around a shared misinformed belief, such as in the case of anti vax Facebook groups. These filter bubbles and echo chambers are the misinformation incubators from which media manipulators spread conspiracy rhetoric to the general public. But let's just call these people what they are. These media manipulators may just as accurately be referred to as propagandists. Successful campaigns to bring mainstream attention to fringe beliefs and conspiracy theories are typically well organized collective efforts by networks of aligned groups that span numerous websites and social platforms. Research into the strategies employed by propagators of disinformation reveals a great deal of PR savvy by a lot of them. For example, the promotional campaign for the COVID conspiracy documentary Plandemic involved curating a robust social media presence for its anti vaxxer central protagonist by framing her as a heroic whistleblower crusading for the truth against the official government narrative. This deliberate molding of Judy Mikowicz's image was part of a strategy to appeal to a mix of conspiracy theorists, QAnon followers, crunchy alternative medicine practitioners, and far right groups whose goals and beliefs aligned with hers to propel her into notoriety beyond just her smaller anti vax circle. Conspiracy propagandists also frequently employ socio-political calls to action and appeals to preserve or return to a particular set of cultural values, as can be seen in the case of current anti LGBTQ rhetoric and Donald Trump's Make America Great Again campaign slogan. The anti vax movement in particular is another example of such propaganda in action. The modern incarnation of this movement has its roots in the late 90s, followed by the publication of a faulty study, which is later retracted. I mean, why am I explaining this to you? Just go watch H Bomb's video if you haven't seen it. I mean, like, seriously, he talks about this whole thing in so much better detail than I can. But just as a high flight overview, on the off chance that you haven't seen it before, the anti vax movement has its roots in the late 90s, following the publication of a really bad and later retracted study by disgraced former doctor Andrew Wakefield, which proposed a link between MMR vaccination and autism in children. However, it was not so much the paper itself that directly caused the anti vaccine scare in the US and the UK as it was the coordinated efforts of a small group of people invested in turning the public against the MMR vaccine, which not only generated media buzz around the paper, but also directly led to its publication in the first place. Prior to its publication, mistrust of vaccines was not yet a true movement, but limited to a small number of parents who believed that their children's autism had been caused by the MMR shot. A group of these parents then filed a lawsuit against MMR manufacturers and hired Wakefield to conduct the study to submit in court as evidence of their claims. This earlier propaganda campaign reveals that anti vaxxers have long been employing reliable media manipulation strategies, the effects of which have only been amplified by social media. Even in the early days of social media, propagandists were already capitalizing on the potential of these new communication networks to spread disinformation and misinformation. For example, a study found that 43% of all vaccine related blogs on MySpace were found to have contained anti vax misinformation. In more recent times, the anti vax movement online has expanded into an extensive network of dedicated YouTube channels, Facebook groups, and blogs. And as seen in the case of the Plandemic documentary and Judy Mikovits, anti vax propagandists are willing to team up with other radical online groups to spread their message. The extent to which disinformation campaigns have infiltrated social media cannot be overstated. For example, studies conducted in 2021 found that over 25% of all YouTube videos related to COVID were misinformative. The skill that propagandists employ in designing much of this content to mimic genuine educational resources from legitimate channels further obscures the distinction between trustworthy and untrustworthy sources. Conspiracy theorists have at their disposal many tactics with which to get their ideas trending on mainstream social media. These include planting fake or sensationalized news stories, hijacking trending topics, popular keywords, and hashtags, and using bots and sock puppet accounts and now AI to attack their opposition or spam content threads. That dedicated conspiracists tend to spread their rhetoric in such an aggressive fashion can be attributed to their awareness that their beliefs exist on the fringe, making them vulnerable to accusations of paranoia and irrationality. As is to be expected, propaganda does garner a lot of negative responses, but as algorithms reward content that attracts a high level of engagement, whether that engagement is positive or negative is largely irrelevant to the goals of social media propagandists. So long as people are talking, the message continues to circulate and gain more traction. And as it gains more traction, inevitably, it gains more believers. Part 3: Combating Conspiracies and the Backfire Effect. Another piece of the puzzle to consider is the role that social media plays in how people counteract the spread of conspiracies and misinformation. It is irrefutable that while the internet as a whole is an invaluable repository of knowledge, the discussion about the dangers of online misinformation have been going on in academia for decades now, and dedicated fact checking sites such as Snopes.com have existed since the 90s, long predating the existence of current forms of social media. With the advent of modern social media, however, academic discourse on the relationship between digital media usage and misinformation has had to evolve. And unfortunately, it's been evolving quite slowly. And the research on how it can be successfully countered online so far is not altogether encouraging, shall we say. One possible reason for the difficulty in combating disinformation and conspiracy beliefs on social media is the backfire effect. Under this theoretical concept, doubling down on a misinformed belief is a coping mechanism by a lot of people against having their worldview challenged, with several studies finding an inverse correlation between correction of false beliefs and the strength of those beliefs. Some media scholars in turn have speculated that attempts to correct or debunk conspiracy theorists on public platforms may also backfire by lending credence to their theories and spreading it to more people. However, this has also been disputed by other researchers, such as Ecker et al. In 2020, who have found no correlation between corrections to false beliefs online and an increased prevalence of those beliefs. More research is needed in this area, although existing studies indicate that positive messaging that preempts the formation of conspiracy beliefs is more effective than simple correction, and that the most effective interventions may involve ones that encourage analytical thinking and media literacy. Notably, social media companies have demonstrated, at least have, like, past tense now, a growing awareness of the problem of misinformation on their platforms. And, up until like the most recent 2024 presidential election, when all of the, you know, major brown nosing of Donald Trump really kicked into high gear, a, very, very minor willingness to perhaps take the issue seriously on the part of like Facebook and YouTube. An internal study conducted by Facebook in 2021 uncovered a core network of anti vax groups who were responsible for spreading the majority of COVID vaccine misinformation on their site. The same study found evidence connecting this disinformation campaign to QAnon conspiracists as well. This raises the question of the responsibility that social media companies have to curb the spread of propaganda. While the uptick in misinformation during the pandemic spurred on platforms such as Twitter, at least pre Elon, YouTube, and Facebook to take limited measures to moderate content more stringently and flag potentially harmful or dubiously sourced information, many researchers have argued that these measures are not sufficient. A study by the Center for Countering Digital Hate largely corroborated Facebook's internal findings, but criticized the company for not taking a firm stance against the 12 prominent influencers that the CCDH identified as responsible for the majority of anti vax propaganda across their site, as well as significant portions of the anti vax content on Instagram and Twitter. Research has repeatedly shown that banning misinformative content and enforcing strict penalties for those who spread it are the most effective strategies for impeding its influence. But the ongoing reluctance of social media platforms to restrict content at the risk of hurting their bottom line offers a discouraging outlook as far as curbing the spread of conspiracy theories and the dangerous radicalizing effect of conspiratorial echo chambers online goes. Part 4. So, what does this all mean and what do we do? Given the rapid pace at which no new social networks online have been developed and adopted, their largely unregulated nature, and the algorithmic bias inherent in the promotion of certain content to its users, the existence of negative repercussions should not be unexpected. The potential for social media to spawn radicalized groups based around conspiracy beliefs has already been demonstrated in real life, and the ability for ordinary people to become propagandists is a concern that should be taken seriously by the platforms, communications researchers, and lawmakers. But unfortunately, in the year of our Lord 2025, it does not look like that is going to be the case anytime soon. Existing research suggests that while the widespread use of social media has not caused people overall to become more susceptible to conspiracy theories, there is a correlation between social media use and susceptibility to misinformation, and it has potentially increased the threat that conspiracy beliefs pose by creating a polarized and highly partisan online environment. So, to go back to my original question, because I kind of got away a little bit from my thesis regarding specifically scientific mistrust, do I think that this social media has kind of largely loosened people's grip on reality and engendered a sense of mistrust in mainstream news and, you know, reputable sources of news and more specifically scientific and health information? Yeah, kind of. I do. And it's very discouraging to think that there's not a whole lot that can be done about it. I know media literacy is such a buzzword these days, but that really is kind of the only, not necessarily solution, but really the only one of the few ways in which we can truly counteract the effect that social media has had on the way we consume and share and think about the information that we consume and share. It's kind of hard to actually fact check and do genuine research when artificial intelligence is spreading more information far and wide than I even realized at the time when I was originally writing this paper for a class like a year and a half ago. You know, things have gotten crazy out there. It's just the absolute Wild West. And, you know, we just need to be able to think critically, and social media, for all the good that I think it's done, maybe it is more of a bad thing than anything else. And I say this while sharing this video on an extremely influential social platform online. And I don't mean to end this video on a negative note, don't want to be a Debbie Downer here, but you know, I did my own research and it kind of really made me feel bad. But and I just hope that we can all still freely share this kind of information with each other in the years to come. Because I think that knowing how this affects us all, how social media works, and where our own beliefs come from, and how we interact with other people, and be conscious of how and what kind of information we are spreading and consuming is important. Thank you all for watching this. I know that from the few videos I've put out so far on like mostly like vampires and such, that I'm not sure if the algorithm is necessarily going to like this, but I hope you all enjoyed it. I have a lot more interesting content on all kinds of things coming up. I'm, still working on my ongoing Dracula tier list series. I have a video on Star Wars and another one on a particular book series. Um, Coming up, and I'm very excited to share it with you all. So please like, share, definitely subscribe. I would like to continue to doing long form deep dive videos like this in the future on more like media focused topics. So if you like this and you want more of it, please subscribe and share this to all of your friends on all kinds of social media platforms. I am on Blue Sky. You can find me there. You can find me on my blog. Links in the description below. Have a lovely day.